Welcome to this very special episode of Spoiler Piece Theater. My name is Evan Crean. My pronouns are he, him. I am co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of your 80s movie guide to better living. And today I am joined by my co-host in life, Shauna Harris.
Hello, and happy Hanukkah.
Yes, Hanukkah is coming early this year, both on the show and in life. In case you hadn't figured out yet, this bonus episode, we are going to be talking about the 33rd annual Boston Jewish Film Festival. But specifically, we're going to talk about a kind of film that's near and dear to our hearts. We're going to be talking about the shorts programs that are playing at the festival. So we've got 3 shorts programs that are playing at this year's festival, which actually started on Sunday, November 7th and runs through Saturday, November 20th. It's a virtual festival, and you can get your tickets online, bostonjfilm.org. And the first set of films that we're going to talk about are from the 11th annual FreshFlix short film competition. And we're going to talk about some of the films that we really enjoyed. First, I think we want to start off with The MOHEL, which is directed by Charles Wool. And here's our plot summary. Recent converts, James and Lola, live in a community without mohels. After the birth of their first son, they must fly one in to perform the bris. Yes. You raised your hand, so I'm going to call on you, Ms. Harris.
Hi, sorry, I'm not used to podcasting, so yes, I did actually raise my hand. I was going to make a joke that normally I'm not inclined to engage in bris course, but we're going to get into it here. So for those of you who don't know, a bris is a circumcision. It's a Jewish ritual that's performed on babies with penises. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this short was that most of it was this like very beautiful story of this family, and they're bringing in the mohel because there's just not a lot of Jews in their area. And the mohel does this like beautiful bris at the house. I just thought it was like very moving, but then it takes this like crazy sharp turn right towards the end where the mohel pulls the husband outside and says, "Hey, you didn't pull a fast one on me. I know that your wife's not Jewish." And he's like, "What do you mean she converted?" And he's like, "No, she's not Jewish. You're not living Jewishly enough. Like you guys don't go to shul. You don't really like engage in the traditions," which he has no way of knowing, obviously, because he's not from their community.
But he knows they don't know Hebrew.
Right. Yeah. The husband stumbled through the prayers and the wife had some tattoos and whatever. And she like went to shake his hand, and he is one of the people who doesn't believe in touching somebody of the opposite sex. And so, he kind of like lays this on the husband at the very last minute and says, "I'm not going to give you the naming certificate," which means that the child is not going to be able to get a bar mitzvah when they become 13. They're not going to be able to get like married in the Jewish way, according to Jewish law. Like it really is a giant gate to throw up like into this child's life. It's a horrible thing to do. The whole reason you have the bris is so that you can, engage in these traditions. And it was just, I think Evan and I both reacted very strongly to this particular short, which is why I wanted to talk about it first, because it really brought up a lot of emotions. Evan, how'd you feel about it?
It was a real gut punch when the rabbi brought that up. And then he followed up with, "But you'll still pay all my fees and all that." I'm not going to give you what I'm supposed to give you out of this, but pay me, please. It was a real gut punch moment. Seeing for both the father and also just thinking about it in the context of the family and how that would limit this couple's child. And I know it struck us very strongly because although I am not Jewish, I have not converted, a similar thing could happen to us in this situation. And so it hit very strongly with the both of us.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a couple of different things that were bothering us a lot. I mean, we are in a family where we have decided to follow Jewish tradition and Jewish customs and have a Jewish household. And so even if you haven't converted, like we have a Jewish home. And so the notion of somebody looking at us from the outside and making a snap determination that we're not good enough when we do everything right is just infuriating, and it breaks my heart, because it is one of those things that we both knew could come up, you know, since we started dating. So it's one of those just like underlying concerns that you're always going to have in this kind of a situation. And I think this really, really got to both of us for that.
Yeah, it was a real gut punch moment. And then knowing, you know, James, the father in this situation, he keeps this to himself for the rest of the day. We see him going through the motions. He comes back inside and his mom's really happy for him and his wife's really happy and talking about, you know, how, you know, proud she is and excited that their son can share in the Jewish traditions. And all the while, he's just kind of sitting on this information, not in a malicious way, but in a like a kind of not trying to ruin the day kind of way, but knowing in the back of his mind that he's got this, you know, this giant thing that he's got to tell everybody. And there's this, you know, moment a little bit after where he decides to pay the rabbi's fees, which personally I would not do in this case.
Yeah, me neither.
But he decides to, and then the rabbi immediately, you know, accepts the fees because it's like over, you know, PayPal, Venmo, one of those kinds of things. And then immediately the rabbi says Mazel Tov, and then the guy James is in the middle of saying motherfucker when the film cuts to black to the credits.
Yeah, which I think is exactly how both of us felt. Like after all that, you're still gonna say Mazel Tov, like you did them a service of some kind. I think when you mentioned the parents' house, one of the things that really struck me was, you know, every single shot in their house, you could see a mezuzah, you could see Judaica, like all throughout the place. Like it was very clear that they were trying to show that the parents cared a lot about Judaism, and the son, you know, maybe had decided to marry somebody else who, by the way, did convert. She did convert. It's just that the rabbi decided that it wasn't good enough, which is a thing that can happen. And, you know, but it's like for someone to make such a judgment on him. And I think it was really impressive to me that he decided not to say anything, that he allowed the rest of his family the you know, to enjoy that moment. And he just had to suffer with it on his own. I know that I personally would not have been able to do that in that case.
No, me neither. I probably would have broken down immediately after it happened.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I think I had some additional frustrations about it because, so technically this situation would not have happened to us because in Judaism, most Judaism, Reform Judaism doesn't care about this, but in other forms of Judaism, it goes through the mother. And so it doesn't really matter what the father comes from, as long as the mother's Jewish, the child will be Jewish. And so, you know, I could be however I want, and the rabbi would still generally decide that it's fine and like give me the naming certificate. And that has always frustrated me to no end. I only learned recently that the reason for that rule is because when the child is born, you can tell physically which parent it came from. That's the rationale I was always given. I did not understand until recently that the point of that was like the reason that you would be asking where the father was is because there was a lot of rape historically. And so this was a rule that was predicated on that understanding that you may or may not know who the father was. And so it's just important to go based on the mother. And so it was like this protective action that is completely no longer valid in society. And so maybe it made sense at one point, but now it really works in the opposite way to just completely leave a bunch of people out from the religion in a way that can be very painful. And I think that this is a really good demonstration of that, which is why I think this really hit me so viscerally. Because I'm all about inclusion and I'm all about, you know, the beautiful opportunities that we've had to celebrate together with friends, with family, and, you know, that like loving feeling that you have of doing this tradition that has been handed down to you. And, you know, to have somebody be pushed out of that, it's very painful.
Yeah. Yeah, so that one definitely hit us pretty hard in this shorts block.
Yeah, there was a lot of crying. There was a lot of me like angrily texting my mother about it. Not angry at her, just angry at the situation, because she's one of the people that I vent to about things. And, she loves Evan more than anything. So I knew that she would understand how we were feeling.
For sure. There were a couple other shorts that we wanted to talk about from the FreshFlix, which is actually a competition. All these films are competing for prizes, and they're from Israel, Canada, South Africa, quite a range of places. The next one we're going to talk about is a film called Paradise, which is directed by Asaf Saban. It's in Arabic and Hebrew with subtitles, and it's about Ali, a young Palestinian who visits home after a long absence, and he seeks peace in the desert of Sinai, but has an identity crisis after telling a lie. To expand on that, basically, he's come back to Israel because it's his sister's wedding, and he's sitting kind of being questioned at the airport for a while, and he's being a bit of a sarcastic guy, but he ends up, getting out of the airport several hours later. His dad calls him asking him where he is, and instead of going to his sister's wedding, he hitchhikes down to Sinai and just spends 2 days there, just kind of hanging out.
Something like that. He's mostly hanging out with the Israelis that he hitchhikes with into Sinai. And I've never seen Sinai. I lived in Israel, but I never went to Sinai. It's one of those places that many people will tell you is dangerous, and many people will tell you is amazing. So, and
there's some specter of that in the film. There's discussion of turmoil in northern Sinai, but no one really understands what that means. There's a scene later on where we see a billow of smoke, and we're told that Bedouin folks are just burning tourist trash, and that's where the smoke is coming from.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because he does initially tell the Israelis that he hitchhikes with that his name is Eli, and he pretends to be Israeli, and obviously he has perfect Hebrew, they don't question a thing. And then he starts getting closer to this girl, that he met there. And, it's right when they're about to have sex that he accidentally says something in Arabic, and then she realizes. And so then he kind of has to come clean to her. And, her reaction is she goes from being so obviously into him to, she's about to have sex with him, but the next scene, you see her pulling the sheets up to cover herself, and she does kind of say it's not that you're a Palestinian, it's that you lied about it. And I think one of the things that I really appreciated about kind of how that whole thing plays out, there is a tension there, and it is hard for me to say, if I was in a position where I trusted somebody enough to have sex with them and then immediately found out that they lied about something so fundamental, I could see how that would be really hard for me. But I can't help but feel for him that, this thing that he didn't mean to lie about, it just that it was easier to deal with, he got picked up by these strangers and they don't know. And it was easier at the time. And, it was something that's so not inconsequential, but it's not like he lied with a nefarious purpose or anything.
No, he just, from what you've told me in Israel, there are a lot of people who hitchhike, and it's a common thing to do. And
I do all the time.
Who picks you up can be a dangerous situation depending on who you are. If you're Palestinian, if you get picked up by Israelis, you feel not necessarily safe, or vice versa. And so I understand why in that situation he was not forthcoming of who he was and what his deal was, especially when he didn't know that he was going to run into them again. He's just kind of okay, I'm going to go along for the sake of going along. And then he goes at this little resort where no one else is there, and it turns out that the Israeli group, they double back and end up coming to this resort and staying there with him. And so that was not an expected situation, but
right. And then he just kind of so happens to get close to this girl, and then they're inviting him to have dinner with them and everything. So it kind of makes sense that this lie just sort of keeps going until it doesn't. And I could totally see him being, devastated from her reaction that. But I think that's what's so beautiful about how this story is told, because it's no one's the bad guy. It's
Right.
just people who are kind of in this backdrop of a really complicated story in a really complicated place, in what sounds like a really complicated time, given there's like specifically stuff going on right now, or like in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and shit just happens. And I think you can really feel for everybody in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, it really speaks to the day-to-day life of people not having malicious intentions toward each other and being able to live and coexist peacefully, but feeling an underlying tension and uncertainty of what to do around each other. And like you said, none of these people are bad. Like, they just don't know how, they're just uncertain. They're not sure whether to trust each other. And so that's the underlying tension, not anyone here is evil for lying or deceiving or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's just people who are stuck dealing with, the complications of the world around them, which is really frustrating. And I think it's really awesome that in all the years that we've seen films from from the Boston Jewish Film Festival, there have been Israeli shorts and films that like really delve into this, because it is complicated. And having lived there, like, there are situations that come up, and it's just, there is racism and there's misunderstandings. There are beautiful moments too, because again, it's complicated. But I really liked how this portrayed that in such a like simple story. And then one of the other things I was telling Evan about, I noticed, like, in the Hebrew, there was a lot of times that they were using Arabic slang, which is normal in Hebrew, but I felt like they were using more Arabic slang than even I would typically hear. And going back to that comment about, Bedouins burning tourist trash, I felt like there was sort of this idea of like, I don't know, like Israeli tourism of like coming and, eating the food and enjoying, the like Bedouin style like tents that they were like, or like area that they were in. And, there was sort of like an Israeli tourism aspect of it that was like not totally icky, but a little icky, given how everything plays out. And I thought that was like a really smart, like kind of underlying thing for them to put in there. I thought that was really well done.
Agreed. Did you have anything else you want to talk about with that short, or should we move on to the Binding of Itsek?
Oh, we should talk about that one. That one's so fun.
Yeah. So this is a short directed by Anika Benkoff. And it's, the summary here is: searching for bookbinding materials, a Hasidic bookbinder comes across a, quote, binding Craigslist ad and quickly becomes tied up in a BDSM relationship. Yeah, that is what happens.
Yeah, and maybe it'll sound weird to say this, but I thought this one was adorable. I thought this was so cute. Like, it was so like nice the way that it played out.
Yeah, it definitely has a sense of humor about the proceedings are just like, he's searching Craigslist for bookbinding. He sees this ad about training submissives in binding, and he like kind of scrolls past it, but then he kind of keeps going back to it. And he gets into, this is really funny, it's an email chain with the poster who's Meatmaster 3000, I think is his name.
I think it's 500, but either way,
yeah. Meatmaster something or other. And so they start this email exchange, and Itsek doesn't reveal who he really is. I think he gives himself a fake name and identity.
He says he's a married woman.
But yeah, he develops this email chain that's just extremely, it's funny the way it's done, because you're hearing on them like narrate their responses to each other, even one word responses or like typos. There's one where Meatmaster sends one that he says Tim's instead of times, and then we hear the follow-up message of him saying times, not Tim's.
It's done very effectively. It was very funny. I think we were both cracking up through the whole thing. And I think we were both struck by multiple times in the conversation when so this Meatmaster 500, who we only know through these messages, he actually like expresses like concern, like if Itzik doesn't answer him quickly enough or things like that, or he like kind of asks like, oh, are you okay, like did I go too far, like he's like really checking in on Itzik in a way that, I mean, from what I understand, is very indicative of the kink community. But I don't know that it's always portrayed in films. So I thought that was
Right.
like awesome that they showed that. It was really cool. I'm sure many people would find that subversive, but it's actually what I understand is supposed to be the norm. Yeah, so I love that.
Yeah, and we're saying it's funny because it's funny, not like haha we're laughing at the situation. Like it's made.
I mean, the situation's funny,
but it's also like humorous. Like the dialogue is humorous.
Yeah.
The line readings are humorous. It's not like haha this is funny. An Orthodox guy is like in this BDSM like email chain.
I mean, that is funny.
It is funny. But yeah, especially because like what you were just saying about how Meatmaster will check in on him after being like, you like this whore? And like, you know, it's like he's saying these like really graphic things, but then being like, really just checking in emotionally, making sure you're okay. I haven't heard from you in a while. Did I say something to offend you? I'm really sorry.
Yeah, it's awesome. And then, you know, they eventually decide they were going to meet. And so they decide that, like, he says he's going to wear a white flower in his hair. And what does Meatmaster say
he says he's going to be wearing a Totes Magoats bag or something like that, and Crocs
cargo shorts.
and cargo shorts or something. It's a very specific outfit.
Yeah, see, you probably get a very specific picture in your head also from that. I know from cargo shorts, I know exactly what I picture. But so he gets to Central Park and he sees a black man sitting on a bench with the Toast Magos bag, and he's like, oh, okay, I guess that must be him. And you know, he's kind of like idling there and sort of like not really sure what to do.
Yeah.
And then he actually does have the white flower with him, and he goes to like put it in his hair, and it falls. And the guy like looks over and sees that it falls and is kind of like, wait, so was she here? Like, did I miss her? And then Itzik like says his name. What's his name?
Alex.
Yeah, he says Alex. And so like right before the movie cuts, you see like Alex have the recognition on his face that it's this Hasidic guy that he's meant to meet. And you have no idea what happens after that.
Right.
Which I love. I love that because I don't think it's for us to know. I think it's exciting for us to just be able to imagine what happens. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic the way this was done.
Yeah, it was really funny, really well done. And the way the whole scene was done too, of like him arriving in the park, peering around the tree, seeing Alex sitting there, then going to sit on the bench, these kind of long, awkward pauses where he's not sure what to do or what to say. And I love that it ends at that moment where he says Alex's name and Alex kind of everything clicks for him.
Yeah. And I love that it's all like, they're both obviously two people who decided to get a little bit more vulnerable than perhaps they normally would and like put themselves out there. And you can kind of tell from their body language, like the whole time that they're not interacting there. And it's really great. And I think one of the things that's awesome about this short is, you know, given the subject nature, it's actually very accessible, I think, to all audiences. I don't think most people would feel really uncomfortable about it. I think it's presented in honestly the exactly perfect, like comical, good-natured, fun tone that I think really nicely conveys, you know, what they're going for.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's just briefly mention the other shorts that are playing as part of the FreshFlix.
Sure.
We've got was it DEVEK? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Directed by Uriah Hertz, and that's about a son who takes his sick mother to a psychic who's living near the Dead Sea to try and kind of basically like keep her alive by like propping her up morally or mentally by being like, yeah, hopefully we'll see the psychic will say good things.
Yeah, if you're anyone who has had to deal with, you know, a sick parent or a loved one, this one may or may not rip your heart out. It certainly had me in tears.
There's also how do you say it? GANEF.
Yiddish.
It's directed by Mark Rosenblatt. It's in London in 1962. It's about this girl who is kind of spooked by her mother's story from the Holocaust about a thief who took from her family. And so she becomes worried that the family housekeeper is stealing from the family. And that was also kind of a tough one from the perspective of like thinking about trauma from the Holocaust and passing down trauma. And just some of the emotional moments between the housekeeper and the little girl are just devastating.
Yeah, this was like the embodiment of hurt people, and just the idea of you can pass that stuff on to your kids without even realizing it, and it's sad. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And then the last one here is called Scumboy, which is directed by Allison Swank. It's a documentary short. It's about a visionary artist named Scumboy. It says this documentary probes Gen Z, who despite unique struggles, offers profundity, self-acceptance, and much-needed hope, which I feel like is kind of a weird way of talking about this doc because it's about a trans artist kind of breaking down the barriers of gender and deconstructing and reconstructing them. And it's about Scumboy's life and arts and relationship in connection to Judaism.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool that Scumboy, like, you kind of see how he weaves Judaism in, and he basically says, like, the way it's written doesn't work for me, so I'm going to make it work for me. And, that I really responded to that because that's kind of what I like to do. So definitely check that out. There was also another one called The Immersion. It's about the mikvah process. It's an animated film. And yeah, I mean, it was a kind of a visceral look at the conversion process for somebody who it, seemed to be very difficult for. So that's the last one from that competition.
Yeah, from that block of shorts. So the next shorts block we're going to talk about is shorts made in quarantine, which is all shorts. I think, well, one of them technically I don't think was made in quarantine. I think it was made prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, we were wondering about that.
We were wondering about that. So where do we want to start? There's, I guess let's start with Tangled Up in Jews.
Sure.
Tangled Up in Jews is directed by Billy Kent. It's actually the summary is the year 5781 is off to a rough start for Xander as his mother and the family rabbi have some news that won't make his Shabbat challah go down well. And do you want to say what happens?
Yeah, I mean this is in the vein of, like, for everybody who's been stuck on Zoom calls for the last 2 years. I mean, it is a Zoom call between him and his mom, and the rabbi pops up, and the mom is like, oh, we've decided that we're going to be a pod together. And that's like her cutesy way of saying that she's dating the rabbi. And he's like, whoa, like the son is like, whoa. And then, after one of my favorite things about it, though, is that the mother is like very colorful in the way that she's like kind of describing their sex life.
Yeah.
In just like a really funny way that I think, kind of exemplifies some of those Jewish mother tropes. But then the tables turn when Xander's like, well, I actually wasn't going to tell you this yet, but I also have some news. It turns out he's dating the rabbi's daughter.
Yep.
So that's a really fun one where the tables turn. Yeah, that's a hilarious one. It was really fun.
It was really funny, really well done. Definitely captured the like awkwardness of Zoom and multiplying it with the awkwardness of the situation, and lines like, I trimmed your penis, which is what the rabbi says to Xander.
Right.
In an awkward moment of and I love the moment where he starts backpedaling once he realizes that, Xander's dating his daughter. Well, maybe you shouldn't rush into things. Maybe this is a moment of desperation. Let's not go too crazy now.
Xander's like, how can you say that? You were just talking to me about how great this relationship was with my mother. Yeah, so that was a very cute one.
Yeah, that one was really funny. Let's talk about Long Distance, which is directed by Asaf Polanski, who I have actually spoken to a few times. I've seen some of his shorts and some films of his film 1 Week in a Day played several years ago at the Boston Jewish Film Festival, and it was really good. And he actually reached out to me before the festival, let me know that his short was playing, and I was looking forward to seeing it anyway, but also excited to see it in this block. So Long Distance is... Summary here is following a year-long distance relationship during COVID, Gil tells Nira during a Zoom session that he is coming to live with her in New York.
Yeah. So from the first minute, I think you can kind of tell that this is a couple that is just like gunning for a breakup. And I think that's what's so like tedious about it is just like kind of watching them both through the Zoom coming to that realization together. And oh God, it's like heartbreaking. I thought this was a very well done, you know, cause he's all like, look, I booked a trip. I'm going to leave in 4 days. I'm going to be by you. And she's just like nonplussed. Like she just doesn't seem happy about it. And he's like, wait, you're not excited? And she's like, well, how come, you know, you weren't so excited about coming like last year when I told you to come with me? And, you know, everything kind of devolves from there. And, you know, you start learning a little bit about their relationship troubles. And like I said, painful.
Yeah. Yep. And this stars Tomer Capone, who you probably recognize from Fauda, and Neve Sultan, who you might recognize from Tehran if you've seen the Apple TV Plus show.
Yeah, they're both fantastic.
Yeah, their performances are really great. That's one thing I've noticed in Asaf Polanski's films. He does a great job of eliciting just like really incredible emotional performances. I mean, 1 week in a day is about grieving parents whose son just died, and so that, you know, that kind of subject is ripe for that kind of emotional mining. And this is too, the long distance relationship, the slow motion breakup. And yeah, it really captures the pain of a breakup, but also the pain of breaking up in real time, long distance.
Yeah. And I think one of my favorite things is that at the very end, he goes to play this concert that they attended together, and you kind of see both of them have this like moment of just like really vibing with the music and enjoying it, and then you kind of see both of them crack like at that moment. It's like they just they rekindled that feeling, but they know that it's just over. And oh my God, it's killer.
For sure. So what do we want to talk about next? How about Dialogues and Monologues?
Yeah.
All right. So Dialogues and Monologues is directed by Alex, I'm going to say Fabry.
Sure.
It's about Jewish sisters, Eva and Vera, who survived the Holocaust as refugees from Europe to New York City. And we see the impact that 80 years of sisterhood and survival have had on their bond. So it's kind of, we see both of them separately in their kind of natural habitats in their apartment. And we see Alex having dinner with them individually and just talking with them and hearing about their lives. And then we see them together. And we see that, you know, although they're extremely close, they could not be more different as personalities. And so I think what's great about this documentary is that it captures this idea that these two sisters have bonded over many years of tragedy, heartbreak, but they're still together, and they've weathered divorces, they weathered the Holocaust, they weathered moving to England and then immigrating to the US, and all the while in their 80s they're still great friends despite the fact that they're just so completely different.
Yeah, and part of that is that they're like constantly picking at each other in little ways. You know, and it's endearing. It's nice when you see, you know, kind of two people that are that close that you can just see them like effortlessly pick on each other, but in that you know, singular loving way.
Oh, for sure. And one of my favorite scenes in the doc is when they one of the sisters is taking the other sister out for her birthday to the movies, and they can't even agree on where they sit. You know, the one sister's like, "Oh, I don't want to sit too close. That hurts my neck," or this or that. And the other sister was like, "Well, I don't want to sit too far back."
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure around then is when one of them makes a joke that, like, you know, they used to have to sleep on top of each other when, you know, I think when they were hiding, you know, and now they can't even pick where to sit in a theater. It's very cute. It's a really lovely story. It is a documentary, so it's true, but
yeah.
And then there were two other films.
That we wanted to mention briefly. Yeah,
one is Voices from the Balconies, and that shows elderly Russian speakers in Israel who were like isolating in their rooms during COVID, and you know, it shows them like on their balconies, like singing to each other and things like that. It's just a short little kind of eye into what that was like, and it's obviously it's very sad because they probably didn't want to be so isolated at this time in their lives. For
sure, yeah. It's directed by Manya Lozovskaya, And it's, a lot of like kind of drone footage of seeing them on their balconies. And there's some, phone call recorded interviews. Like there's one guy who's talking about how he doesn't read or write in Hebrew. And so he struggles with the fact that he's got to request his, unemployment benefits or his pension or whatever it is. And he struggles to fill out these forms. He's got to print them out, fill them out, scan it back in. And just like, how do you manage that? So it captures these little human moments of different struggles that people face during the pandemic, but especially older folks in this situation kind of being trapped inside, and how depressing that can be. It's a somber couple of minutes, but it definitely hits you where it hurts in a good way.
And then the last short from that block is Yom Kippur in Lockdown. So this is the Jewish community in Melbourne, Australia, and it is actually really it's a good explanation and a good kind of like eye into sort of the import of Yom Kippur. And I thought it was really moving that they basically have this Jewish community that's very diverse, and they show, all the way from people who are like, much more Orthodox to people who are like very secular, and how all of them, were really upset about having to change their Yom Kippur service. Usually everybody's in temple together, like most people go to temple. And it was kind of showing how all of them were being forced to adapt, and they all kind of singularly were very upset about losing out on that kind of family community aspect. And in particular, they were talking about some of the like most famous songs from Yom Kippur. So the evening service for Yom Kippur, when it starts, is called Kol Nidre. And the Kol Nidre song is so like somber and just absolutely beautiful. And it's haunting. It's a haunting tune that I think many of us just kind of like have a visceral emotional reaction to. And I loved seeing that. I know it's not just me, but it was nice seeing other people feeling about it the exact way that I always have.
And I like that the documentary profiles, different cross sections of Jews. Like they have like the in the middle with this woman named NADIE who's like, I'm not really that religious, but I really like going on Yom Kippur.
Right.
Or like they have this guy, they call him the cultural Jew, and he's like, I don't go to shul any other time, but I go for Yom Kippur every year. I gotta be there. That's like the one thing I do. They have, a woman who's a Holocaust survivor who's, like for her, like the community is super important, and she's struggling for the fact that she can't go to shul because she doesn't have much of a community otherwise. And
right.
But they also talk to the cantor there and the rabbi there and talk about their relationship. So it covers a lot of ground in the amount of time, and it is a good window into Yom Kippur for folks that may not be as familiar. They definitely like define it and talk about the holiday in a way to that's kind of accessible to people who might not be Jewish, which I liked. But I think this documentary's probably greatest strength, in my opinion, is showcasing a Jewish community that we don't often see. Like in film and movies and TV, we often see the kind of like US Jewish community, often like East Coast, New York base, or we see, Israel and the Israeli Jewish community, but we don't see a lot of communities outside of that. And so I like that this shows a very vibrant community in Melbourne and Australia, a place we don't typically see Jewish life. So I think that's a really strong point.
Yeah, we were watching it and I said to Evan we should move there because I was like, that community looks amazing.
Yeah, it looks like a really nice place to live.
So I guess we're down to our last shorts block.
Yep. This is in 32 minutes or less, which is the name of this shorts block. Where do we want to start on this one?
Why don't we start with Never Again? Because I think it's one of the more moving entries in this one.
Sure. Yeah, Never Again, or Para Nadie, I think is how they say
Para
it.
Nadia, I think.
Nadia. Para Nadia. Yeah. This is directed by Anna Feder. And on August 14th, 2019, a peaceful demonstration against the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement contract with the Wyatt Detention Center in Providence, Rhode Island, turned violent when a correctional officer hit several protesters with a car. You've probably seen news clips of this. I definitely saw it.
Oh yeah.
It's horrifying to see a group of protesters and having a guy who's, working at the prison drive into the crowd, and he kind of like drives in, stops, and then starts driving again. It's extremely jarring and terrifying. And so this documentary kind of traces the build up to that moment and the groups that came together for this protest, both in the the day previous, where a lot of the people who were at the second day protest had been arrested the first day and then came back, and then kind of the emotional aftermath of this situation.
Yeah, and I loved that. So on the first day, you're seeing a lot of people who they're saying, look, like they're members of, various Jewish communities, but they're all kind of saying like, look, we took the lessons to heart from the Holocaust. Like, that's why we're here, because we can't have concentration camps on our soil. And yeah, I'm choking up just thinking about it, because that was just a horrific time. But yeah, so one of the things that I thought was really monumental is one of the women who was like, look, I understand. Like, she was kind of reflecting on her process of being arrested and saying like, I was never afraid. I was never like worried for my safety. Like, I was very aware of my privileges when I showed up, and this was my job, was to like use my privilege to speak for others. And there were times that they were singing and they would be chanting, and like people in the prison would be like looking out through the windows and like cheering them on and stuff. And like, so the first day was just this very moving, kind of beautiful moment amid, this horror that's happening in freaking Rhode Island, which is just way too close to us.
Yeah.
And so then, it's that backdrop going into the second day when we all know what ends up happening. And I don't know. I can't watch real footage of just people in a car, like people just deciding that they have more value on this earth than others. Because this guy, like, he bulldozed like 14 people. Like, and we got to see it from a lot of different angles, and it's
yeah. I mean, and he relied on the standard defense that a lot of people have used in these situations where someone in a car has hit, injured, killed people during a protest, and claimed self-defense for what, in my opinion, is a terrorist act. And so for him to sit there and say, I was afraid, I, needed to get to work and all this bullshit, when, there was clearly on-street parking, which there was, this is indicated in the documentary, that he could have easily used and not put himself in this situation.
And people were also talking about how throughout this entire time there was police officers everywhere. And yet all of a sudden, right when this goes to happen, all of them are gone. They're not anywhere to be found. And then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of like, I guess, prison guards
correctional
who come
officers
out and surround the car and like pull all of the people away, and then they start like tear gassing them,
pepper spraying, whatever, macing them,
pepper spray,
whatever it is,
and
they take it out and just start immediately attacking
all
the
hell
crowd.
Breaks loose, which obviously they demonstrated, like literally while demonstrating the day before, that was not going to happen. They were there peacefully. Everybody knew what was going on. Like, it was so obvious, the stark contrast, and the fact that the only people who were being violent in this case were people who, the prison guards. And then, one of the other things is they went to the attorney general and the protesters. They went to the attorney general, and there was a quote of some woman who said, like, I went to them to protect me because of this horrible thing that happened, this attempted murder, basically. And obviously no charges. And, she's like, look, I went for protection from the attorney general, like you're supposed to do. And she's like, I won't make that mistake again. And I think that's the answer when the government isn't going to be there for you, when you're helpless and there's just no like order. That's how the rule of law gets lost. And to me, I think this was a really good demonstration of that it's just, when you're on opposing sides of something and one person has a badge, things don't go the way that they should go. And this one had us both in tears. It was hard to go through it the first time, and it was hard to relive it watching this. Yeah,
seeing it from a much closer perspective and understanding the context of the community too.
So I guess going from there, it maybe makes sense to do Becoming Nakuset.
Yes. which is a short directed by Victoria Anderson Gardner. It's Canadian. The summary is: a survivor of the 60s scoop, Nakuset was adopted by a Montreal Jewish family. Using personal archives, she struggles to find her identity. Or she shows her struggle to find her identity. So she is an Indigenous person in Canada, and from what I understand, the 60s scoop was when there were a number of Indigenous children that were adopted and placed into a foster care system where they were adopted by, from what I could tell, a lot of white or upper crusty kind of families. But her struggle is that she ended up with a family who had two other children, one biological, one adopted, and how she always kind of felt like an outsider in that family, and she wasn't treated equally as the other children. And so what happened to her was that she ended up finding and reclaiming her Indigenous identity through her bubby, through her grandmother on her father's side, who was the only person in the family who kind of like cared for her and took her under her wing. So this actually becomes this like really moving story about, if not for her grandmother, you know, she might have ended up in a really bad situation in life, but instead she found her biological family. She connected with them. She connected with her Indigenous roots, and she had been volunteering at an Indigenous women's shelter and has worked her way all the way up to now be the executive director of the group. And so she won I think a humanitarian award or something recently, and she dedicated it to her bubby. It's a very moving story.
Yeah. And I mean, it was so hard though, because her family, the way she recounted it, it sounded like her family just treated her like shit. Like they, you know, would kind of say, like, and I don't know why you adopt a kid if you're going to do this, but they would tell her that, you know, she's useless. She's never going to amount to anything. She's just going to end up addicted to drugs and alcohol, you know, so that's her home life. And then she has her grandmother who like is the only one who always believed in her. And so like that saved her when she was a child, and then being able to go on and find her family. You know, I connected with that on a couple of different ways, but I know my mom was raised in a lot of ways by her grandma, and I know how close they were together and how strong that relationship was. And I kept seeing parallels in that. You know, there is little that can change your life, like a good Jewish grandmother.
Or a good Italian grandmother, as I can say.
Oh yeah, we're gonna see her on Sunday.
So yeah, this was a really moving short and a really incredible story, and I'm glad that I got a chance to see it through the festival. Seeing an Indigenous person's experiences, I was glad they included that as a film here.
Yeah. And on a bit of a lighter note, Mom's in town and she didn't tell me.
Hey now. Mom's in town. Mom's in town and she didn't tell me.
I got you. Directed by Alina Margolin, so may or may not related. To me, my stepfamily is all of Margolins, so fun little relation there. Yeah, it's a young loafer discovers that her mom is on a secret visit. She calls up her brother, and together they try to find out what their mom is hiding. Yeah, so this is also an Israeli short. Yeah, so this young woman like sees her mom randomly on the street, and so she goes and like follows her and sees that she goes up to this apartment building of a chiropractor. And then she's like calling her brother, and she's like, get over here, I don't know what's going on. And you know, so they're like spying basically, and she like fakes an appointment with the chiropractor to go see him later in the day. And you know, while she's in there on that appointment, the mother actually comes in, and you can kind of tell that they've been seeing each other romantically, and she comes in and like breaks up with the chiropractor. So basically, like unbeknownst to them, the daughter is on the chiropractor's table listening to all of this, and it's really cute because the mom is just like breaking up with him for like stupid reasons. And all of a sudden the girl is like, she like gets up and she's like, Mom, what are you doing? Like stop ruining everything. It's very cute.
It is cute. Nice. And like there's funny things we see that both the sister and the brother and the mother all have this birthmark on their back. So like when she's down on the table, the chiropractor has like a moment of pause. They're all Russian Jews, and so there's this like thing where the chiropractor is offering up all these like homeopathic remedies that involve like cabbage and beet juice. He's like, yeah, I got a cabbage beet juice thing that'll cure you right up. And there's like a scene afterwards, like after the mom has left, and they did decide to still break up, but the daughter is sitting having the like gross beet juice concoction, sitting with the chiropractor and just like having a conversation, and that was really funny.
I think it's left in such a way that maybe they'll figure things out. At least that's my hope. I certainly want them to end up together.
Yeah. It's really cute and it's funny, and it's just, you know, the idea of like the sister and the brother kind of like launching this covert operation to like it's really funny. Like the beginning, she's carrying this fan around in a box, and then she puts the fan together and brings it into the apartment building as like a ruse to lure the chiropractor out of his house so she could spy on him, and she leaves the fan outside and he just takes the fan into his apartment.
Yeah, like with no warning. He like I don't remember if they rang his doorbell or something.
They did, yeah, and they hid.
And he comes outside and he sees the fan and he's like, okay. He like shrugs and takes it. And they're like, oh, well, that's interesting that he's gonna just take a fan like that. Yeah, it's cute. It's very cute.
So we want to wrap up our conversations with we want to talk about this documentary called A Jew Walks into a Bar, which is directed by Jonathan Leo Miller, and the summary is: an ultra-Orthodox Brooklynite aspires to stand-up comedy in this refreshing and funny depiction of the dichotomy between religion and career.
And what a dichotomy it is.
Oh boy, is it a dichotomy. I think what we've talked about, what one of the interesting things about this is, you know, the subject of the documentary. He is religious, and his name is David Finkelstein, and he wants to remain religious. Like, he's not doing comedy as an act of rebellion. He's doing it because he legitimately enjoys it, and also because it actually helped him out of a depressive state in his life. He was depressed. He had severe anxiety, and comedy, like stand-up comedy specifically, is a way that he's been able to kind of recover. And since doing comedy, he was saying that he was not having panic attacks anymore. He was actually like able to reclaim his life. And so he's trying to find this balance of like, how can I stay religious but also be a comedian, but also how do I not pigeonhole myself into being the ultra-Orthodox comedian? Like, there's a scene in the documentary where he has this great performance, and he sees all of these Jewish people in the audience who are like trying to book him for their like daughter's bar mitzvah and their shul's this or that, and he's kind of like
party.
Yeah, and he's not really sure whether he wants to do that, because he's not sure, like, can I stand on my own merit, or am I always going to be the like Orthodox Jew who's doing comedy?
Yeah, I loved this. I loved the kind of different tensions that we get to see. At first, I think you get to see a lot of him, you know, just being very clear in that he wants to do the stand-up comedy, but it, like Evan said, he doesn't want to like leave Judaism or leave Orthodoxy, you know, and so he's like kind of dealing with that a little bit, because obviously, or maybe it's not as clear to everybody, but this is one of those things that can be kind of looked down on. And he kind of explains like there's a lot of like Jewish law about like not speaking ill of other people. And he was kind of saying that a lot of comedy, you kind of have to speak ill in order to make a joke. And so it's like, you know, there's just a lot of things that he feels like you're not really supposed to do, and that people would be really unhappy if they were to know. So he's really kind of doing all this in secret. You know, so you start off seeing that, and then at a certain point you see him kind of like not relaxing, but like he takes off his hat, and he's like, at one point he even doesn't wear a kippah while he's performing. And
he kind of experiments.
It broke my heart a little, but he put it back. He put it right back on after. And he like wore regular clothes at one point. You know, like just jeans and a regular shirt.
Yeah, and a hoodie instead of, you know, a blazer and a white shirt and, you know, black pants.
Yeah, but he still had his tallit on. But, you know, one of the things I thought was really cool is like, so his jokes are really funny. Like, he's very funny. But he was talking about how he doesn't want to always have to be stuck making like Hasidic like jokes at his expense or jokes at Judaism's expense. And I loved that because he was talking about how he has some of these like really funny jokes, but he doesn't really feel comfortable using them because he's like, it's not a joke to me. And it definitely reminded me a lot of Hannah Gadsby's first special called Nanette, where I think like she talks about that also, this idea of like trying to do comedy in a way that's not self-deprecating. Yeah, and so it's just a really interesting kind of look at what that's like to be going in between those two worlds. And you know, you see a lot of these like backstage moments with him and his like comedy friends.
Them asking questions about his life and religion and trying to understand different, you know, Orthodox Jewish customs.
Yeah, it's cute because they're all pretty obviously not at all like well versed in his background. Like they kind of ask him like, "Oh, do you like go to church a lot?" And you know, but they're not being rude. They're all trying to be respectful. It's kind of funny like the knowledge gap. You know, but they're definitely trying to be nice. There is one moment that like I like I like stopped breathing. There was this one girl comedian and he was like kind of explaining to her that he can't shake her hand, and she was like, "Oh, but I think she said I'm Puerto Rican. We always shake hands."
Yeah.
And she actually like hugs him, like kind of forcibly hugs him, and you can see that he's you know, he's laughing, but he's laughing in that like, I'm terrified, like, oh God, what do I do now? Because that's just, he doesn't do that. That's not what they do.
He's not supposed to do that.
And like that really crossed a line for me. Like that was really hard to watch. I think both of us were just kind of like, oh
yeah, but breaking people's boundaries, it's
like
not
massively.
Cool. Yeah.
And for him, I mean, it's such a big deal. Like not that it's not important to respect everybody's autonomy and personal space, but just given the circumstances, especially when he had just been describing like why, like how important it was for her to like then land a giant hug on him that like lasted for several seconds.
Yeah.
Oh God, that was awful. So, you know, he's had to deal with some of that.
Yeah, I'm be interested to see if he's still doing stand-up when the documentary ends. It mentions that he had been taking a hiatus from performing, but was still writing comedy. So it'll be interesting to see if he still is, because he kind of was running into a long-term issue of like, how do I make this sustainable? Because I can't travel / perform on Friday and Saturday if I'm going to be religious, and like I feel like that's just one thing I'm not willing to line I'm not willing to cross.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of like barriers that he was like just starting to kind of contemplate, like not be like, since Friday is such a big night for comedy, and you know, like he keeps kosher obviously, so it really limits like where he's able to get food, and obviously throughout the country there's not a lot of like places that cater to kashrut, and so it's just you know, there's going to be a lot of like real world concerns also, like if he releases a special and then like his whole community finds out about it, and you know, it's definitely him kind of having to take stock in how he wants his future to look, and I guess it remains to be seen. I very much hope that we do see a special from him, because he really was quite funny.
Yeah, very funny.
Yeah, I definitely don't miss that one.
So there were just a couple more shorts that were playing as part of this block that we want to give quick mention of. There's The Collection, which is directed by Emmanuel Blanchard. The summary for this one is, during the occupation of Paris in 1942, Victor Gentz, an unscrupulous merchant, buys artwork belonging to Jewish collectors. This one's kind of a weird, gut punchy kind of thing about this like gross art dealer who's, cheating Jews out of their artwork and their money. That one was definitely not easy to watch. There's Golden Gym, which is directed by Tamir Aharoni and Gil McNeil, which is a claymation short about the loss of independence that comes with old age after an elderly person gets into a car accident and he refuses to give up on going to the gym. That one's kind of like sad, but also kind of zany and fun when he makes like a crazed escape. He's on the stationary bike and the stationary bike comes loose and he just goes riding off into the sunset, and it's quite amusing.
Yeah, it's a nice way to wrap it up, but I was still in tears.
Yeah. And then the last one we wanted to mention that was playing there is ZAIDA, which is directed by Sophie Perens. It's about her grandfather, Henri Perens, and he's a Holocaust survivor, and it's about his experience surviving the Holocaust in France and Belgium, and but then also about his life. He went on to become a very famous child psychiatrist, and he's written tons of books about the Holocaust, about child psychiatry and parenting, and just a really fascinating story, a fascinating life. And I guess, at the end of the documentary, find out that he's 92. He's been practicing for over 50 years, and he still sees patients to this day.
Yeah, and the director is his granddaughter, and it's actually kind of really beautiful. Like, one of the sad things from his childhood is he had to escape the camp that he was in, and so he had to leave his mother. And at one point he kind of reflects on that, like what did that mean, like to have to leave her? But then he looks to his granddaughter who's behind the camera. You don't see her, but he looks like kind of through the camera to her, and he's like, but then I look at you, and oh my God, like you would be crying through the whole thing, but at that point especially.
Yeah,
it was really it was a very moving one.
it is. Yeah, and he was the sole survivor in his family, and so that's a difficult thing to tackle. If he lost all of his relatives, he didn't even know what happened to his mom for decades. I think he didn't know what happened to her,
and I think he still doesn't know what happened to his brother and his father. I think he said he never knew, which is unfortunate. That is a reality of mass genocide.
Yeah. So that one was moving as well. And so we saw some really great shorts in all three blocks, the FreshFlix block, the Made in Quarantine block, and the in 32 minutes or less block. All these shorts are playing in groups at the Boston Jewish Film Festival. You can go to their website, bostonjfilm.org, and you can see these blocks. You can actually rent them and watch them on your computer or on your Roku. You got lots of different options, and they'll be available, I think, through November 20th, which is when the festival wraps up. So I would say we recommend them. Do you have anything else you want to add about the festival or about the shorts we saw?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend checking out all of these. They were all absolutely worth the watch. They were all fantastic. I do love that they're all streaming, so you can pretty much check everything out on your schedule while the festival is ongoing. And I have to say, Evan and I have been watching films from the festival for the last 6 years or so. They're fantastic. They pick wonderful films. They're very diverse. They have a giant number of communities that you can look into and different kinds of stories. And every single year we end up seeing several movies that we both just absolutely love. So if you're looking for something to do, this is a great opportunity, and it is definitely a fantastic Hanukkah gift, if I do say myself.
Yep. Yeah, we've been watching films from the festival. They're all really fantastic, and I think a lot of credit due to the artistic director of the festival, Ariana Cohen-Halberstam. She picks some fantastic films, and this year is no different.
Yeah, every year we say if she picked it, we know it's going to be good, and she has not let us wrong yet.
Yeah. So we want to thank the Boston Jewish Film Festival for sharing these films with us, and we hope you check them out. And,
yeah, please do.
Yeah. And this has been a special episode of Spoiler Piece Theater. We covered shorts, which is not our usual thing that we do, but we thought it'd be fun, and we thought it'd be fun to talk about Jewish films, especially with Shauna, who's been on the show before, to talk about Jewish films, legal films. I don't know. You've been on to talk about some other kind of random movies in the past, and so we thought this would be fun because we always see these movies together, and we enjoy talking about them and watching them together.
Yeah, there's nothing better than a good movie, and now you all know why we're together.
That's true. So thank you, Shauna, for coming on the show for the special episode.
Oh, no, thank you.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. You can find the show anywhere you get podcasts. You can also find Spoiler Piece Theater at our website, spoilerpiece.com. We're all over social media. We're Spoiler Piece Theater on Facebook and at Spoiler Piece on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, etc. And Yeah, I think those are all the important things. So thank you for tuning in.
One more thing. Ema, none of the dogs die. Everybody's good.
Okay, right. Important mother-in-law note. No dogs were harmed in the making of these shorts or the release of them. I can't guarantee that the making of them didn't involve. Just kidding.
No dogs were harmed.
No dogs
ever.
were harmed. All dogs are good dogs. The end.
Hugs a math.
My name is Evan Crean. I am co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living. You can follow me Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd as Real Recon. That's real as in film reel. And Shauna, do you have any places you want people to follow you?
No.
Well, alrighty then. That's it. Bye, folks.
Laila tov.